Hi, prayer partners. Hope you've had a good week. We've been thinking for the past couple of weeks about family life. We've been looking at Ephesians chapter 5 and talked about wives, submit to your husbands. Husband, love your wife as Christ loved the church. And then last week we talked about children, obey your parents. And I can almost hear some of you folks thinking and asking the question, but Ron, you left out the most important people in the family structure, the grandparents. And the interesting thing about that, the only time the word grandparent is used, or it literally is grandmother, is found in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5. And Paul is writing to Timothy and encouraging him and reminding him of some things. And Paul is the one who brings up this issue of grandparents. And it says there in 2 Timothy 1:5, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, I am persuaded is in you also. The only mention the Bible gives of grandparents is this one time. Matter of fact, in the New Testament, it's the only time the word is used or even referred to. Old Testament, there's a lot of genealogy that was recorded that the Jews found important to them. And it talks about so-and-so begat so-and-so who begat, who begat, who begat. And you can go back and trace the grandparents who were in those family trees. But that's the only reference that was made to them. Matter of fact, when New Testament talks about family life, husbands and wives, it says, and for this reason shall a husband leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That when we assume the responsibility of beginning our own homes as husbands and wives and raising children, that we are to do so with the responsibility being on our shoulders 100%. It's nice when grandparents are in the picture and can help and can relieve the burden of taking care of kids once in a while so mom and dad can kind of catch their breath. But the only time grandparents are married in the family structure is here in 2 Timothy. But even though this is the only time it's mentioned, it puts a tremendous amount of responsibility on the grandparents. Paul says here, I remember the genuine faith that is in you. And he said, and I'm convinced the reason it's there is because you had a grandmother named Lois and a mother Eunice, and that faith was in them. He not only was in them, not only does he refer to the fact that they were believers in Jesus, but he says that which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois. That word dwelt there means to abide, to live in. And he says the genuine faith that was in you. I believe the King James says the unfeigned faith, literally a faith that was without hypocrisy. In other words, Paul is saying here, Timothy, you owe a great deal to your grandmother and your mother because they didn't just talk about Jesus as some religious figure. They didn't just talk about you need to go to the synagogue or you need to go to church or any of those kind of things. They lived it. They modeled it. They practiced it on a daily basis. It was a part of their lives, and it was never separated from them. And Paul said, Timothy, I'm confident the reason that your faith is where it is because of your grandmother and your mother. Interesting thing about all of this, that Paul chose Timothy to be his partner in ministry, if you will, to invest his life into Timothy and to teach him and train him in things of ministry. Timothy probably would have been the most unlikely candidate for that. Timothy was probably caused Paul more problems than Paul already had dealing with the Jewish people, because in Acts chapter 16 and verse 1, it reminds us that Timothy's mother, Eunice, was a Jew and his father was a Greek. Now, do you remember what they referred to people back in that day and time who were not 100% Jewish and they weren't 100% Greek or Gentile. They were Samaritans. And do you remember the Jewish sentiment and response towards Samaritans? They were the folks on the other side of the tracks. They were the folks nobody wanted anything to do with. The Greeks didn't want anything to do with them because they weren't 100% Greek. Jews didn't want anything to do with them because they weren't 100% Jewish. And so neither group wanted anything to do with them, and they were outcasts. They weren't permitted in synagogues. They weren't permitted into the temple. They were considered defiled and unclean and unholy. And here Timothy is. His dad's a Greek. His mom's a Jew. And not only just a Jew, but a Jew who converted to accepting Jesus Christ as her Savior. And Paul reminds Timothy that faith that your grandmother and your mother had, it wasn't just something in passing that they talked about. It lived in them. It was not hypocrisy. They practiced what they professed. And Timothy, because of that, that's where your faith came from, was the example that your grandmother and your mother presented to you. Now, grandparents, that puts a lot of weight on our shoulders, doesn't it? Our children and our grandchildren need to see Jesus in our lives. It doesn't give us any indication that Timothy's dad, even though he was a Greek, it doesn't give us any indication that he was a believer whatsoever in Jesus. We don't know. We'll have to wait till we get to heaven to find that out. But it was obvious his mother was, and it was as obvious that her mother was. And that example that came down through the generations from parent to child to grandchild was an example that Lois lived out. So grandparents, I want to challenge you today. We've talked about women submitting to their husbands, wives loving their husbands, loving their wives, children obeying their parents. But grandparents, are you being the example that your children need to see? Is your faith in Jesus evident and real and apparent to your family members? Or is it just talking and saying you need to do this, you should do that, this is what is, no. With Lois, Timothy's grandmother, it was a practice in her life that others could see clearly and easily. And that's our challenge this week. That's my challenge this week. Is my faith evident, not just to my children, not my family around me, my neighbors, people I rub shoulders with in the community, but is my faith something that's genuine, something that's real, something that's not hypocrisy, but something that is a part of my life that my grandchildren can see? Paul said again, 2 Timothy 1:5, when I call to remembrance, this was something Paul remembered because it made an impression on him as well. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelled first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, I'm persuaded is in you also. Timothy, the reason you're where you are is because you had a grandmother and a mother who were believers in Jesus, and they didn't just talk about it, they lived it. Husbands, are you loving your wife as Christ loved the church? Wives, are you submitting to your husbands as unto the Lord? Children, are you obeying your parents? And grandparents, are you setting the example for the rest of your family to see? Quite a challenge, isn't it? Family is a big responsibility, and family takes a lot of work. But one day when we gather around the throne, it'll be worth it all. God bless. Have a great week.